Black chef fired from restaurant for no reason. 6 months later, this happened. Kitchen of Le Petit Chateau was a symphony of sizzling pans, chopping knives, and barked orders. Steam rose from bubbling pots, carrying with it the intoxicating aromas of herbs, spices, and perfectly seared meats. At the center of this culinary whirlwind stood Marcus James, executive chef and maestro of this gastronomic orchestra. At 35, Marcus cut an impressive figure in his crisp white chef's jacket. His dark skin glistened with a sheen of perspiration, evidence of the heat and intensity of the kitchen. But it was his eyes that truly stood out, keen, focused, alive with passion as he surveyed his domain. "Jean, watch that sauce. It's reducing too quickly," Marcus called out, his rich baritone carrying easily over the kitchen din. "Marie, those scallops need another 30 seconds, no more." His team moved with practiced precision, a well-oiled machine honed by Marcus's leadership over the past 5 years. Under his guidance, Le Petit Chateau had risen from a respectable French bistro, one of the most sought-after reservations in the city. Critics raved about Marcus's innovative take on classic French cuisine, infused with influences from his southern roots. As the dinner service wound down, Marcus allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. It had been another successful night, the dining room buzzing with contented patrons and the occasional burst of delighted laughter. "Great job tonight, everyone," Marcus said, addressing his team. "Clean up and head home. Tomorrow's another big day." As the staff began their closing routines, Marcus retreated to his small office off the kitchen. He sank into his chair with a weary sigh, the adrenaline of service giving way to bone-deep fatigue. But it was a good tired, the kind that came from a job well done. A knock at the door roused him from his momentary reverie. "I'm in," called, expecting it to be his sous chef with the night's numbers. Instead, Gerald Duchamp, the owner of Le Petit Chateau, entered. At 60, Gerald was the picture of Gallic sophistication, silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tailored suit immaculate despite the long evening. "Ah, Marcus," Gerald said, his French accent still pronounced even after decades in America. "Excellent service tonight, as always." Marcus smiled, always appreciative of Gerald's praise. "Thank you, sir. The team really pulled together. That new duck confit dish was a big hit." Gerald nodded. There was something off about his demeanor. He seemed uncomfortable, almost nervous. Marcus felt a flicker of unease. "Is everything all right, Mr. Duchamp?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. Gerald sighed, not quite meeting Marcus's eyes. "Marcus, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. The board of directors and I have been discussing the future direction of Le Petit Chateau, and we've decided that, well, we think it's time for a change in the kitchen." Marcus blinked, sure he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "We're letting you go, Marcus," Gerald said, his words coming in a rush now. "Effective immediately. We'll pay out your contract, of course, and provide an excellent reference. But we need you to clear out your things tonight." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Marcus gripped the edge of his desk, feeling as though he might fall out of his chair. "But what? Our numbers are better than ever. The critics love us. I don't understand." Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "It's nothing personal, Marcus. We just feel the restaurant needs a different direction. A return to more traditional French cuisine." Marcus felt a surge of anger cut through his shock. "Different direction? Mr. Duchamp, I've poured my heart and soul into this kitchen for 5 years. We've received accolades, awards. How is this not personal?" Gerald's expression hardened slightly. "The decision has been made, Marcus. I'm sorry, but it's final. HR will be in touch about the details of your severance." With that, Gerald turned and left the office, leaving Marcus alone with the ruins of his career scattered around him. For several long moments, Marcus sat in stunned silence. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake, bad dream. But the ache in his chest, the sick feeling in the pit of his stomach, those were all too real. Slowly, mechanically, Marcus began to pack up his office. His hands shook as he placed his prized knives, a gift from his grandmother when he graduated culinary school, into their roll. Photos came down from the walls. Marcus with his team at the last Christmas party, Marcus receiving the city's Chef of the Year award, Marcus and Gerald shaking hands on the day he was promoted to executive chef. That last photo gave him pause. He stared at it, remembering the pride he'd felt that day, the sense of achievement. How quickly it had all crumbled. As he packed, snippets of conversation from the past few weeks flitted through his mind. Hushed discussions that stopped when he entered the room. The new maitre d', who always seemed to be watching him with a critical eye. The board members who had been visiting more frequently. Huddled in conversation with Gerald. Had he been blind? Were there signs he should have seen? A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Marie, his sous chef, peeked in, her eyes wide with concern. "Chef, is everything okay? We saw Mr. Duchamp leave, and he looked." Marcus cut her off, unable to bear the sympathy he knew would come. "Everything's fine, Marie. I'm leaving. Tonight, Mr. Duchamp thinks the restaurant needs a change." Marie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Leaving? But chef, that's impossible. We can't do this without you. Kitchen, the menu, it's all you." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat at Marie's loyalty. "You'll be fine, Marie. You're more than ready to take over. I've taught you everything I know." As word spread through the kitchen, other staff members appeared at the door. Jean, the saucier, Alicia, the pastry chef, even gruff old Frank, the dishwasher. Their faces were a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. Marcus addressed them all, fighting to keep his voice steady. "It's been an honor working with all of you. You're the finest team I've ever had. Keep pushing, keep innovating. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do in a kitchen." As he spoke, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if there was more to his dismissal than Gerald had let on. In the 5 years he'd been at Le Petit Chateau, he'd faced his share of challenges. There had been suppliers who balked at dealing with a black chef, customers who asked to speak to the real chef, and he did his rounds in the dining room. But he'd always believed his talent and hard work spoke for themselves. Now, as he looked at the devastated faces of his team, a diverse group he'd carefully cultivated, a sick feeling grew in the pit of his stomach. Was this really about returning to traditional French cuisine? Or was there something more insidious at play? Marcus pushed the thought aside. He couldn't go down that road, not now. He had to focus on what came next. As he left the restaurant for the last time, his possessions in a box under his arm, Marcus paused to look back at the gleaming facade of Le Petit Chateau. The sign he'd helped design, the menu in the window featuring his creations, it all seemed to mock him now. The night air was cool on his face as he walked to his car, stark contrast to the perpetual heat of the kitchen he'd called home for the past 5 years. As he drove through the quiet streets of the city, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He was unemployed. In a city where the restaurant scene was notoriously competitive, where executive chef positions were fought over like scraps of meat, he was suddenly adrift. And if word got out about his abrupt dismissal from Le Petit Chateau, his chances of landing another top position would be slim to none. As Marcus pulled into the driveway of his small house, he saw the living room light was still on. Ava, his wife of 10 years, was waiting up for him. How was he going to tell her? Ava, who had supported him through long nights and missed anniversaries, who had believed in his dream even when it seemed impossible. Taking a deep breath, Marcus gathered his box and headed inside. The moment Ava saw his face, she knew something was wrong. "Marcus? What happened? Why are you home so early?" Marcus set the box down carefully, then looked at his wife, the strong facade he'd maintained at the restaurant finally crumbling. I've been fired, Ava. Gerald let me go. Effective immediately." Ava's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "Fired? But that's impossible. Le Petit Chateau is thriving because of you." As Marcus recounted his conversation with Gerald, Ava's expression cycled through disbelief, outrage, and finally, fierce determination. "This isn't right, Marcus. There has to be more to it. We should fight this." Marcus shook his head warily. "Fight it how, Ava? It's Gerald's restaurant. He can hire and fire whoever he wants. And if I make waves, it could hurt my chances of getting another position." Ava opened her mouth as if to argue further, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she wrapped her arms around her husband, holding him tight. "We'll figure this out, Marcus, together. This isn't the end, just a setback." As Marcus returned his wife's embrace, he wanted desperately to believe her words. But as the shock of the evening began to wear off, replaced by a growing sense of uncertainty and fear, couldn't help but wonder. What came next? in a career he'd built on the foundation of his talent and passion. Where did he go from here? Little did Marcus know, but his dismissal from Le Petit Chateau was just the beginning. Coming months would test him in ways he never imagined, forcing him to confront not just the challenges of rebuilding his career, but deeper questions about identity, justice, and the true meaning of success. As he finally fell into a fitful sleep that night, Marcus James had no way of knowing that his journey was far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. The weeks following Marcus James's abrupt dismissal from Le Petit Chateau passed in a blur of disbelief, anger, and growing desperation. Each morning, Marcus would wake up, half expecting it all to have been a bad dream, only to be confronted with the harsh reality of his situation. The first week, he allowed himself to wallow. He slept late, stayed in his pajamas, and binge-watched cooking shows, alternating between critiquing the chef's techniques and fighting back tears of frustration. Ava gave him space, understanding his need to process the shock. But as the second week dawned, Ava's patience began to wear thin. She found Marcus in the kitchen at 3 a.m., furiously chopping vegetables. "Marcus?" he said softly, not wanting to startle him. "What are you doing?" Marcus looked up, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Kitchen was a disaster, pots and pans strewn everywhere, the counters covered in half-prepared dishes. "I'm proving them wrong," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm creating a new menu, something so innovative, so perfect that they'll have to take me back." Ava's heart broke at the desperation in her husband's voice. Gently, she took the knife from his hands. "Honey, come to bed. This isn't helping anyone, least of all you." As she led him back to their bedroom, Ava knew something had to change. The next morning, over a cup of coffee, she broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "Marcus, we need to talk about what comes next. Have you thought about looking for another position?" Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "I've been avoiding it," admitted. "The thought of starting over somewhere new, it's terrifying. And what if word has gotten out about my dismissal? Who would want to hire me?" Ava reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "You are an incredible chef, Marcus James. Any restaurant would be lucky to have you. But they can't hire you if you don't put yourself out." Bolstered by Ava's encouragement, Marcus began to send out resumes and make calls to his contacts in the industry. But as days turned into weeks with no positive responses, his optimism began to fade. It wasn't just the lack of job offers that was wearing him down. It was the whispers he heard, the sympathetic looks from former colleagues when he ran into them. Word had indeed gotten out about his dismissal from Le Petit Chateau, and the rumors were flying. Some said he'd had a meltdown in the kitchen, throwing pots at his staff. Others whispered that he'd been caught stealing from the restaurant. The truth, that he'd been let go without explanation, seemed to be lost in the shuffle. As his savings dwindled and the bills piled up, Marcus was forced to confront a harsh reality. He might have to look for work outside of the high-end restaurant world he'd called home for so long. It was Ava who found the ad in the local paper. "Line cook wanted, Mama Josie's Soul Food Kitchen," she read aloud one morning. "It's not executive chef, but it's a start, right?" Marcus felt a flicker of resistance. Mama Josie's was about as far from Le Petit Chateau as you could get. A small, family-run place known for its hearty portions and down-home cooking. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and the rent was due. The interview, if you could call it that, was unlike anything Marcus had experienced before. Mama Josie herself, a round, jovial woman in her 60s, took one look at Marcus's resume and burst out laughing. "Honey, I don't need all these fancy French words," she said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "Can you cook a mean collard green and fry chicken so good it'll make a grown man cry?" Marcus, taken aback, nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My grandmother taught me everything she knew about soul food before I went to culinary school." Mama Josie's eyes twinkled. "Well then, you're hired. And don't you ma'am me. It's Mama Josie to everyone here." And just like that, Marcus found himself back in a kitchen. It wasn't the kitchen he'd dreamed of, with its state-of-the-art equipment and Michelin star aspirations. But as he tied on his apron and fired up the grill, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since that fateful night at Le Petit Chateau. The work was hard and the hours long, but Marcus threw himself into it with everything he had. He learned to appreciate the simplicity of soul food, the way a perfectly seasoned piece of fried chicken could bring joy to a customer's face. And slowly, he began to remember why he'd fallen in love with cooking in the first place. But even as he found a measure of peace at Mama Josie's, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling he was meant for more. Every time he passed a high-end restaurant, every time he saw a food magazine featuring the latest celebrity chef, felt a pang of longing and resentment. One evening, as he was closing up the kitchen, Mama Josie called him into her small office. "Marcus, honey, we need to talk," she said, her usually jolly face serious. "You're a good worker, and Lord knows you can cook. But I can see it in your eyes. This isn't where you're meant to be." Marcus started to protest, but Mama Josie held up a hand. "Now don't you go arguing with me. I've been around long enough to know when someone's settling. You've got a gift, child, and it's not meant to be hidden away in a little place like this." As Marcus left that night, Mama Josie's words echoed in his head. She was right, of course. But what could he do? The high-end culinary world had shut its doors to him, and he had no idea how to pry them back open. It was a chance encounter, finally gave Marcus the push he needed. He was shopping at the local farmer's market, picking up ingredients for Mama Josie's, when he quite literally bumped into Marie, his former sous chef from Le Petit Chateau. "Chef Marcus," she exclaimed, her face lighting up before clouding with concern. "How are you? We've all been so worried." As they caught up, Marcus learned that things at Le Petit Chateau had changed dramatically since his departure. The new executive chef, a young hotshot from Paris, had scrapped Marcus's entire menu. The innovative dishes that had put the restaurant on the map were gone, replaced by what Marie described as pretentious and overpriced traditional French cuisine. "It's not the same without you, chef," Marie said, her voice tinged with sadness. "The soul is gone from the kitchen." As Marcus walked home, his mind was racing. The anger and resentment he'd been suppressing for months bubbled to the surface. It wasn't fair. He'd poured his heart and soul into Le Petit Chateau, only to be discarded without explanation. But mixed with the anger was something else, a spark of determination he hadn't felt since his dismissal. Marie's words had rekindled something in him. The soul was gone from the kitchen at Le Petit Chateau. Well, maybe it was time to bring that soul somewhere new. That night, as Ava slept beside him, Marcus pulled out a notebook and began to write. Ideas flowed from his pen: menu concepts, restaurant layouts, business plans. For the first time in months, he felt truly alive. As the sun began to peek through the curtains, Marcus looked down at the pages filled with his cramped handwriting. It was crazy. It was risky. But it was also exactly what he needed to do. He was going to open his own restaurant. Path ahead would be challenging. He had no money, no investors, and a reputation that had been tarnished by his dismissal from Le Petit Chateau. But he had his skills, his passion, and a burning desire to prove everyone wrong. As Marcus finally drifted off to sleep, a small smile played on his lips. He didn't know it yet, but the journey he was about to embark on would not only redefine his career, but would shake the very foundations of the city's culinary scene. The black chef, fired from his restaurant for no reason, was about to make a comeback that no one would see coming. And the events that would unfold over the next few months would leave everyone, from his former employers to the city's top food critics, utterly shocked. The decision to open his own restaurant filled Marcus with a renewed sense of purpose, but it also brought with it a host of new challenges. First, and most daunting, its funding. Marcus and Ava had depleted most of their savings during his unemployment, and banks were reluctant to lend to someone whose last venture had ended in such a public dismissal. "We'll figure it out," Ava assured him, her unwavering support a balm to Marcus's frayed nerves. "We always do." Marcus threw himself into planning, spending every spare moment refining his concept and menu. He envisioned a place that would blend the refined techniques he'd honed at Le Petit Chateau with the soulful flavors of his southern roots. He called it Fusion Soul, a name that reflected both his culinary philosophy and his personal journey. But as weeks passed with no progress on the funding front, Marcus began to feel the stirrings of despair. Was he chasing an impossible dream? It was on a particularly disheartening day, After yet another rejection from a potential investor, that fate intervened in the most unexpected way. Marcus was walking home, lost in thought, when he heard a commotion up ahead. An elderly woman had fallen on the sidewalk, her groceries scattered around her. Without hesitation, Marcus rushed to help. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, gently helping her to her feet. The woman, her silver hair escaping from a neat bun, looked up at him with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I'm fine, young man, just a bit clumsy in my old age. Thank you for your help." As Marcus gathered her groceries, the woman studied him intently. "You look familiar," she mused. "Have we met before?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't think so, ma'am. I'm Marcus James." The woman's eyes widened in recognition. "Marcus James, the chef from Le Petit Chateau? I thought you looked familiar. I'm Eleanor Winters. My late husband and I used to dine there often. Your food was simply divine." Marcus felt a pang at the mention of his former restaurant, but managed to smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. That's very kind of you to say." As he walked Mrs. Winters home carrying her groceries, she peppered him with questions about his current endeavors. Before he knew it, Marcus found himself pouring out the whole story: his dismissal, his struggles to find work, and his dream of opening his own restaurant. To his surprise, Mrs. Winters listened with rapt attention, occasionally nodding or making thoughtful noises. As they reached her townhouse, a beautiful brownstone in one of the city's most affluent neighborhoods, she turned to Marcus with a gleam in her eye. "Mr. James, I have a proposition for you. Would you be willing to cook dinner for me and a few friends next week? I'll pay you, of course. Think of it as a private chef gig." Marcus, taken aback by the unexpected offer, nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Winters. I'd be honored." What Marcus didn't know as he left Mrs. Winters that day was that this chance encounter would change the course of his life. The dinner party was set for the following Friday. Marcus spent the week meticulously planning the menu, determined to showcase the full range of his skills. He decided on a fusion menu that blended French techniques with Southern flavors, preview of what he hoped to offer at Fusion Soul. When he arrived at Mrs. Winters' home that Friday, he was surprised to find a fully equipped, professional-grade kitchen waiting for him. As he began to prep, he could hear the murmur of voices from the dining room, but he remained focused on his task. The menu was ambitious: a starter of cornbread madeleines with whipped honey butter, followed by a silky smooth collard green velouté. The main course was a sous vide fried chicken, the meat impossibly juicy beneath a crisp, perfectly seasoned crust, served with truffled mac and cheese and bourbon-glazed carrots. For dessert, a deconstructed peach cobbler with lavender ice cream. As Marcus plated the final course, Mrs. Winters appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mr. James, would you mind joining us for a moment?" Heart pounding, Marcus followed her into the dining room. Seated around the table were 5 other guests, all watching him with interest. "Everyone," Mrs. Winters announced, "this is Marcus James, the chef I was telling you about. Marcus, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions. There was Robert Chen, prominent restaurant critic; Maria Delgado, who owned a successful chain of upscale restaurants; Amos Harper, a venture capitalist known for investing in innovative startups; Sarah Goldstein, a real estate developer; and James Thompson, a retired judge, a well-known philanthropist. As Marcus stood there, suddenly aware of his chef's white stain from cooking, Mrs. Winters smiled warmly. "Marcus, I hope you'll forgive my little deception. When you told me about your dream to open a restaurant, I knew I had to help. Everyone here has enjoyed your wonderful meal, and now we'd like to hear about your vision, Fusion Soul." For a moment, Marcus was speechless. Then, gathering his courage, he began to speak. He told them about his concept, his vision of blending cuisines and cultures. He spoke of his passion for cooking, his dedication to his craft, and his dream of creating a restaurant that would be more than just a place to eat. It would be a celebration of diversity, creativity, and community. As he spoke, Marcus could see the interest growing in the eyes of his audience. When he finished, there was a moment of silence, broken by Robert Chen. "Mr. James, I've eaten in restaurants all over the world," critics said slowly. "But I can honestly say that the meal you prepared tonight was one of the most exciting, innovative dining experiences I've had in years. This is a preview of what Fusion Soul could be, I think you might just have the next big thing on your hands." One by one, the others chimed in with their thoughts. Maria Delgado offered advice on restaurant management. Sarah Goldstein mentioned a few properties that might be perfect for the restaurant. Thomas Harper asked pointed questions about financials and business plans. As the night wore on, Marcus felt a growing sense of excitement. These people, titans of the food and business world, were taking him seriously. They were engaged with his idea, offering suggestions and support. It was James Thompson who finally asked the question Marcus had been both hoping for and dreading. "Mr. James, what do you need to make this dream a reality?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Honestly, funding and guidance. I have the skills and the vision, but I'm new to the business side of running a restaurant." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I think I speak for everyone here when I say we'd be very interested in helping make Fusion Soul a reality. Mrs. Winters has excellent taste both in food and in people, and if she believes in you, that's good enough for us." Marcus felt as though he might faint. Was this really happening? Mrs. Winters beamed at him. "What do you say, Marcus? Are you ready to take the next step?" As Marcus looked around the table at the encouraging faces, he felt a surge of emotion. This was more than just an opportunity for funding. It was a chance to prove himself, to show the world and Gerald Deschamps what he was truly capable of. "Yes," he said, his voice firm with determination. "Yes, I'm ready." As he left Mrs. Winters' home that night, his head spinning with plans and possibilities, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at how quickly things had changed. Just hours ago, he had been on the verge of giving up his dream. Now, he had a team of influential backers and a clear path forward. But even as excitement bubbled within him, Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. Opening a restaurant was a monumental task, and he would face challenges he'd never encountered before. And lurking in the back of his mind was the knowledge that somewhere out there, Gerald Deschamps and the team at Le Petit Chateau were continuing on without him. What would they think when they heard about Fusion Soul? How would they react when they realized that the chef they had so callously dismissed was making a comeback? As Marcus hailed a cab to head home, eager to share the night's events with Ava, couldn't have known that his journey was far from over. The coming months would test him in ways he never imagined, forcing him to confront not just the challenges of opening a new restaurant, but deeper questions about identity, redemption, and the true meaning of success. The stage was set for a culinary comeback that would shock not just Gerald Deschamps, the entire city. And at the center of it all was Marcus James, the black chef fired for no reason, now poised to revolutionize the local food scene. Little did anyone know, but the real shocks were yet to come. The months following the fateful dinner party at Mrs. Winters' home were a whirlwind of activity for Marcus James. With the support of his new backers, he threw himself into the process of bringing Fusion Soul to life. Sarah Goldstein, true to her word, helped Marcus secure the perfect location for the restaurant, a charming historic building in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The space needed work, but Marcus could already envision how it would look once renovated. Thomas Harper worked with Marcus to refine his business plan, offering invaluable advice on financial projections and operational strategies. Maria Delgado shared her expertise on staff management and restaurant operations, while Robert Chen provided insights into the current trends and preferences, the city's discerning diners. Through it all, Mrs. Winters remained a steadfast supporter, often dropping by the construction site with words of encouragement and the occasional home-cooked meal for the hard-working crew. But despite the support of his influential backers, Marcus soon discovered that opening a restaurant was far more challenging than he had anticipated. There were permits to secure, suppliers to negotiate with, staff to hire and train. Each day brought new obstacles, and there were moments when Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the task before him. One particularly trying day, after a shipment of crucial kitchen equipment was delayed for the third time, Marcus found himself sitting on the dusty floor of the half-finished restaurant, his head in his hands. "Chef, are you all right?" Marcus looked up to see Marie, his former sous chef from Le Petit Chateau, standing in the doorway. He had hired her as soon as he had secured funding, knowing there was no one he trusted more to help bring his vision to life. "I'm fine, Marie," Marcus sighed, getting to his feet. "Just having a moment of doubt. There's so much to do, so much that could go wrong." Marie's eyes softened with understanding. "Do you remember what you used to tell us at Le Petit Chateau when service got crazy? One dish at a time, one table at a time. Maybe we need to approach this the same way. One task at a time, one day at a time." Marcus felt a smile tugging at his lips. "When did you get so wise, Marie?" "I learned from the best chef," she replied with a grin. Reinvigorated by Marie's words, Marcus redoubled his effort. He worked tirelessly, often pulling 18-hour days as he juggled the myriad tasks involved in opening a new restaurant. As word began to spread about the upcoming opening of Fusion Soul, Marcus found himself the subject of intense curiosity in the local food scene. Food bloggers speculated about the menu, industry insiders gossiped about the high-profile backers, and more than a few people wondered aloud how the disgraced former chef of Le Petit Chateau would fare with his own establishment. The attention brought with it a new set of challenges. Marcus had to learn to navigate interviews, social media, and the constant scrutiny of the public eye. It was a far cry from his days in the kitchen, where his food could speak for itself. But with each passing day, as Fusion Soul inched closer to becoming a reality, Marcus felt his confidence growing. The menu he had dreamed up in those dark days after his dismissal was coming to life, each dish a perfect fusion of his classical training and his southern roots. There were setbacks, of course. A few weeks before the planned opening, a pipe burst in the newly renovated kitchen, causing extensive water damage. Marcus and his team worked around the clock to repair the damage, refusing to let this derail their plans. Through it all, Ava remained his rock, offering unwavering support and a calm presence amidst the chaos. She had taken a leave of absence from her own job to help with the restaurant, handling everything from paperwork to social media management. Finally, after months of hard work, sweat, and more than a few tears, Fusion Soul was ready to open its doors. The night before the grand opening, Marcus gathered his staff, a diverse group of talented individuals he had handpicked, for a final pep talk. "Tomorrow," he began, looking around at the eager faces, "we embark on a new journey together. This restaurant is more than just a business. It's a statement, a declaration that great food knows no boundaries, not of culture, not of tradition, and certainly not of race." He paused, feeling a swell of emotion. "Some of you know that this opportunity came after a period of great difficulty in my career. There were people who thought I was finished, who believed that a black chef couldn't succeed at the highest levels of the culinary world." Marcus's voice grew stronger, filled with determination. "Tomorrow, we prove them wrong. We show them that diversity is our strength, that fusion isn't just about combining flavors, it's about bringing people together. Each of you brings something unique to this kitchen, and together we're going to create something extraordinary." As his staff erupted in cheers and applause, Marcus felt a sense of pride and purpose unlike anything he had experienced before. This was more than just a comeback. It was a revolution. The grand opening of Fusion Soul was a triumph beyond Marcus's wildest dreams. The restaurant was booked solid, with a waiting list stretching months into the future. Critics raved about the innovative menu, the warm ambiance, and the impeccable service. Robert Chen's review in the city's most prestigious food magazine was particularly glowing. In Fusion Soul, he wrote, "Marcus James hasn't just created a restaurant. He's created a movement. Each dish tells a story. Heritage, of innovation, of the beautiful complexity that arises when cultures meet and meld. This is more than just a meal. It's an experience that will change the way you think about food." As the weeks passed and Fusion Soul's popularity continued to soar, Marcus began to feel that he had finally found his place in the culinary world. He was doing what he loved, on his own terms, surrounded by a team that shared his passion and vision. But even as he basked in the glow of his success, Marcus couldn't help but think about Le Petit Chateau and Gerald Duchamp. He had heard through the grapevine that the restaurant was struggling, its new menu failing to capture the magic that had made it a destination under Marcus's leadership. Part of him felt a grim satisfaction at this news, but another part, The part that still remembered the joy of creating in that kitchen felt a twinge of sadness. Little did Marcus know, his paths were about to cross with Gerald Duchamp once again, and the encounter would lead to revelations that would shake both men to their core, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, their industry, and the insidious nature of prejudice. As Marcus closed up Fusion Soul late one night, basking in the afterglow of another successful service, he had no idea that the most shocking part of his journey was yet to come. The true test of his character and the full impact of his comeback was about to unfold in ways that no one, not Marcus, not Gerald, not even the savvy Mrs. Winters, could have predicted. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only change the fate of two restaurants, but would send ripples through the entire culinary world. And at the center of it all was Marcus James, black chef who had risen from the ashes of unjust dismissal, become a beacon of change in an industry long overdue for transformation. 6 months after the grand opening of Fusion Soul, Marcus James found himself in a position he never could have imagined a year ago. His restaurant was the talk of the town, consistently booked weeks in advance. Food critics were hailing him as a visionary, and young chefs from across the country clamoring to work in his kitchen. But success, Marcus was learning, brought its own set of challenges. The pressure to maintain the high standards he had set was immense. Each night, as he surveyed his bustling restaurant from the pass, he felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. He knew that in the culinary world, you were only as good as your last meal. It was on a busy Friday night, with Fusion Soul in full swing, that Marcus's past and present collided in a way he never expected. As he was expediting orders, calling out tickets with the practiced ease of a seasoned chef, Marie appeared at his elbow, face pale. "Chef," she said, her voice barely audible over the kitchen's din, "Gerald Duchamp is here. He's asking to speak with you." Marcus felt as though he'd been doused with ice water. Gerald Duchamp, the man who had fired him without explanation, who had nearly derailed his entire career, was here in his restaurant. For a moment, Marcus was tempted to refuse to have Gerald escorted out. But something, curiosity perhaps, or desire for closure, made him nod. "Tell him I'll be out in a few minutes," he told Marie, turning back to the tickets in front of him. When Marcus finally emerged from the kitchen, he found Gerald seated at the bar, nursing a glass of wine. The older man looked different. Smaller somehow, less imposing than Marcus remembered. "Gerald?" Marcus said, his voice neutral. Gerald looked up, and Marcus was startled to see the man's eyes were rimmed with red as though he'd been crying. "Marcus," Gerald replied, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for seeing me. I owe you an explanation, then an apology." Taken aback, Marcus gestured to a quiet corner of the restaurant. As they sat, Gerald took a deep breath. "What I did to you was unforgivable," he began. "I let my own prejudices, my own fears, cloud my judgment. I convinced myself it was about the direction of the restaurant. The truth is, I was afraid." "Afraid?" Marcus echoed, confusion and anger warring within him. Gerald nodded, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. "Afraid of change. Afraid of what it meant that the best chef I'd ever worked with, the man who was bringing in rave reviews and packed houses every night, was a young black man from the South. It challenged everything I thought I knew about French cuisine, about who belonged in a high-end kitchen." As Gerald continued, a full story came out. The board of directors, seeing the success Marcus was bringing to Le Petit Chateau, had been discussing the possibility of making him a partner in the restaurant. Gerald, faced with the prospect of sharing control of his life's work, had panicked. "I spread rumors, Marcus," Gerald admitted, shame evident in his voice. "I suggested to the board that there were inconsistencies in the inventory, hinted that perhaps you were stealing. I knew it wasn't true, but I was desperate to hold on to control." Marcus sat in stunned silence, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within him. Anger at the injustice, disgust at the racism that had derailed his career, but also a strange sense of vindication. He had always known he'd done nothing wrong, but to hear it confirmed— "Why are you telling me this now?" Marcus finally asked. Gerald sighed heavily. "Because I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. And because Le Petit Chateau is failing, Marcus. Without you, without your vision, we've lost our way. I'm here to ask for your help." Marcus barked out a laugh of disbelief. My help? After what you did? I know I have no right to ask, Gerald said quietly, but Le Petit Chateau isn't just my restaurant. It's the livelihood of dozens of staff members, many of whom you worked alongside for years. They don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. As Marcus struggled to process Gerald's words, he became aware of a commotion near the entrance of the restaurant. Looking up, he saw Robert Chen, the food critic, engaged in an animated discussion with Mrs. Winters. Excusing himself from Gerald, Marcus made his way over to them. Can't believe you kept this from me, Eleanor, Robert was saying. This is the story of the year. Mrs. Winters caught sight of Marcus and smiled apologetically. I'm sorry, Marcus. I had hoped to prepare you for this, but it seems the cat is out of the bag. What's going on? Marcus asked, a sense of foreboding settling over him. Robert turned to him, eyes gleaming with journalistic fervor. Marcus, did you know that you were set to be named Chef of the Year by the Culinary Institute just before you were fired from Le Petit Chateau? Marcus blinked in surprise. What? No, I had no idea. It's true, Mrs. Winters confirmed. I was on the selection committee. We were going to announce it the week after. Well, after everything happened, when you were fired, the committee was thrown into chaos. Some wanted to go ahead with the award, others felt it would be too controversial. As Mrs. Winters explained, Marcus learned that she had been working behind the scenes all along. Her chance encounter with him that day on the street hadn't been chance at all. She had been looking for an opportunity to approach him, find a way to right the wrong that had been done. I couldn't tell you earlier, she said, patting his hand. I needed you to succeed on your own merits, not because of any sympathy or sense of injustice. And oh, my dear, how you've succeeded. The pieces were falling into place now. The influential dinner guests, the timely support, the guidance that had helped him navigate the challenges of opening Fusion Soul, it had all been part of Mrs. Winters' plan to give him the second chance he deserved. As the truth of the situation washed over him, Marcus felt overwhelmed. He looked around the restaurant, his restaurant, the happy diners, the efficient staff, the warm ambiance he had created. Then he looked back at Gerald Duchamp, still sitting alone at the corner table, the weight of his mistakes visible in the slump of his shoulders. In that moment, Marcus James made a decision that would once again shock the culinary world. Returning to Gerald's table, Marcus sat down, face serious. I'll help you, he said simply. Gerald's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. You will? But why? After everything I did? Marcus held up a hand. I'm not doing it for you, Gerald. I'm doing it for the staff of Le Petit Chateau, people who became like family to me over the years. And I'm doing it because Fusion Soul was born out of the idea that food can bring people together, can bridge divides and heal wounds. If I turn my back on that belief now, then everything I've built here is a lie. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked closely with Gerald and the staff of Le Petit Chateau, helping to revitalize the menu and retrain the kitchen. He brought in elements of the fusion cuisine that had made Fusion Soul such a success, blending them with the classic French techniques that were Le Petit Chateau's hallmark. The story of Marcus's firing, his triumphant return with Fusion Soul, and his magnanimous assistance to the restaurant that had wronged him became the talk of the culinary world. Robert Chen's article, when it was finally published, was not just a restaurant review, but a powerful commentary on racism in the industry and the transformative power of forgiveness. 6 months later, the annual Culinary Institute Awards, Marcus James stood on stage, accepting not one but 2 awards, Chef of the Year and a special recognition for his contributions to promoting diversity and innovation in the culinary art. As he looked out at the audience, he saw faces that represented every stage of his journey. Ava, beaming with pride, Marie and the staff of Fusion Soul, cheering loudly, Mrs. Winters and his early supporters, looking satisfied at a plan well executed. And there, at a table near the back, sat Gerald Duchamp, his eyes shining with something that looked like admiration and remorse in equal measure. This award, Marcus said, his voice strong and clear, is not just for me. It's for every chef who has ever been told they don't belong. It's for every kid from the wrong side of the tracks who dares to dream big. And it's for every person who believes that food has the power to bring us together, to help us understand each other a little better. Paused, looking down at the award in his hands. A year ago, I thought my career was over. Today, I stand here not just as a successful chef, but as living proof that second chances are possible, that talent and determination can overcome prejudice, and that the best revenge is not just success, using that success to lift others up. As applause filled the auditorium, Marcus felt a sense of peace wash over him. The journey had been difficult, filled with unexpected twists and painful revelations. Standing there, he knew that every struggle had led him to this moment, had shaped him into the chef and the man he was meant to be. The black chef fired from his restaurant for no reason had not just made a comeback. He had changed the face of the industry, opened doors for others like him, and proved that the power of great food, like the power of the human spirit, knows no boundaries. As Marcus left the stage, surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations, he caught sight of a group of young, diverse culinary students, watching him with awe and hope in their eyes. In that moment, he knew that his journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.